Hello and welcome to the VentureForth podcast. I'm your host, Joe Mahavuthivanij. We'll be chatting with some of the most interesting founders, startups, and VCs about the experiences that led them to where they are today, what they're currently working on, as well as the journey ahead of them. Today we are with Vincent Cardillo, who was most recently the co-founder and CTO of Bento, a food delivery startup offering high-quality Asian cuisine on demand. Most of us were introduced to Vincent on Season 3, Episode 6 of Gimlet Media's popular startup podcast, and if you haven't heard it yet, you should definitely check it out. I think it was really a rare and intimate look into the life and times of a startup. And with that, I'd like to welcome my good friend Vincent to the inaugural episode of the VentureForth podcast.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me on the show.
Can you tell us a little bit about Bento and how you met your co-founder, Jason DeMont?
Sure. So we met on a website called Founder Dating back in the middle of 2014. And as the name implies, you go on lots of dates with lots of potential co-founders. And I met Jason and kept in touch with him over a few months, and we had some back and forth, and ultimately he was the most buttoned up, I think the most put together, potential CEO that I had met, given my limited comparison obviously on this, but compared to everyone else that I had met, so we decided to go into business together, to get business married off of Founder Dating.
So most people probably don't know this, but Vincent and I actually met on Founder Dating as well.
Right.
So it's a pretty effective website for meeting really interesting people. So I really love the startup podcasts, but Bento's story was particularly interesting for me because I grew up and spent over 10 years in the family restaurant business. Did you have any experience in the industry before diving in, and how did the unit economics end up the way that they did?
I did not have a lot of experience. I guess the only real experience I would say I had was working in a restaurant when I was a kid as a busser, a host, and washing dishes. That said, I've always wanted to experience running a restaurant, because of the passion that I had for food in general. Yeah, the unit economics, let me think how to answer that in a succinct way. I think a couple things happened. The first was that we received our second large seed round because of the growth that we had and how quickly we had achieved that growth. So people obviously liked our product. They were hungry for our product. I guess the implied wisdom was you should focus on that customer growth and worry about the more detailed aspects of the business later. That being how to make money with the business. In hindsight, I think that that's fundamentally not a sound idea. You need to have a general concept. You need to have a plan for how to make money, because otherwise it doesn't matter how many customers you have. You're just going to lose money faster. I think that's kind of the summary of it. And we were focusing on growth because that's what we thought was important to keep the business running in the long term.
Also, maybe what prevailing wisdom, at least in the echo chamber of Silicon Valley, is just concentrate on growth and maybe spend whatever you need to get that growth until you can get to a positive unit economics.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, ultimately, it's us, right? We're the ones responsible for running the business. But you're right. I think echo chamber is a good word. Us and many other businesses, I think, were and are encouraged by that wisdom of grow now and worry about business later. And I think that's finally starting to come to an end.
So I think that's really popular advice, especially for food delivery businesses too. I mean, we've seen some high profile failures recently. At the point when you joined Bento, there was already quite a few food delivery businesses in the market. How did you decide to take the leap with Bento? You mentioned that Jason was the most buttoned up founder that you met, but food delivery is also a crowded space.
It is, yeah. And you're right. I mean, going back to what you said, I think you're right. With food in general, I think that focusing on the margins, in particular with this industry, are important. I think with other industries, that wisdom is probably correct, where you can worry about, with pure software, you can worry about how to make money with it later, because just having users using the product is really important. But you're right, I think with food, you do need to worry about how to make money with it up front. Yeah, so I have a big passion for food, and I have a pretty big interest in the industrial food industry. There are some kind of scary statistics, like 40% of the food that we produce is wasted, and that's through just overproduction, supply chain inefficiencies, all sorts of things like that. I think it's John Oliver has a pretty good bit on that. If you're interested in ever watching that, it's just really sad, actually. And then you look at industries like, let's just take chicken, and you look at stuff. You look at labels like free range. The definition of free range is pretty pathetic. They can be cooped up in an area outside that is smaller than the area that they have inside, and they're not actually able to move around. And that's considered free range. Or they can be put outside, for the last 30 or 20% of their life, and that's somehow considered, free range. Or grass-fed beef. If you see the word grass-fed beef, you think, oh, it must be, you picture this cow that's roaming around the pasture, but it's not. They're just cooped up the same way, and they're just fed grass instead of corn, so that you can say that it's grass-fed beef. So the food industry, the industrial food industry in general, I think, has a lot of work to be done, a lot of improvement to be made. And it's just starting to come to light. There's some movement. I think HuffPost did a piece on food waste, and there's some other articles that have been circulating on this particular topic. But that was really what the interest that I had. And I think there are two ways that you can fix a problem like this, of this scale. You can do it in Washington with lots of lobbying, or you can do it at the corporate scale, where you become a large enough company that you can influence your supply chain and your vendors. It doesn't have to be something that you ask your customers to do. It's just an internal ethos that guides the company, kind of like Chipotle. I would liken it to a lot of what Chipotle does. So that was the goal. That was like the end game for me personally, was to have, a food company that became large enough, that has this really positive internal ethos, and can start to bring to light some of these issues, and do something good for those issues.
So when you launched, that was part of your, I guess, mission. Did customers respond to that?
No, I mean, in the beginning, it was just it wasn't something that we ever put forward, and I don't think we ever really did a good job of that. We had, internally, we did a lot of work on our suppliers and where we sourced our food from, and having really quality ingredients. And I think I pushed a lot of that, much to the chagrin of my partners at times. But no, I mean, if we had, it was hard too, especially I think with this cuisine, where you have certain sauces and certain ingredients, and it's hard to make those, and it's also hard to buy them in a way that they don't have a bunch of like high fructose corn syrup in them, or a bunch of artificial ingredients. So it was hard for us to say 100% this or 100% that, but we would always say no MSG added, all natural. So we did take a lot of pride in the food, but there may have, there was always like, I don't know, some one ingredient here or there that was just so difficult to source properly. And now, like as we progressed, it took 6 or 8 months to get to that point, but we have really, really high quality ingredients that we've taken a long time to source.
What was your most favorite meal that you served?
I think I would say the seared salmon tataki. That was, and it was it's expensive, and Jason always used to joke, this is VC subsidized salmon, which was true. And so then we downgraded that, and then we finally found a middle of the road, really high quality sustainable salmon that was from Washington state. Sustainably raised is the term, which means it's better than farmed, and it's actually better than wild caught, because it's grown in a sustainable way. And the taste on that was fantastic.
When times were hard, did you or Jason ever cook for Bento? Or drive even?
I drove a few times to test the technology, to have the driver experience. I definitely didn't cook in the beginning. There was enough other things for me to be doing. Later, when we moved kitchens and had a larger kitchen that had a little office in it, where we could work, I would be in the kitchen a little bit, helping out, especially in the morning when we had these large, high volume catering orders and just needed more hands chopping or filling pods or whatnot.
When I first visited Bento's kitchens, you showed me some really interesting things. It looked like that you had invented some insulated bag technology because you had hot items and cold items and stuff like that. What went into the development of that?
Oh yeah, that brings me back. Yeah, so it turns out, keeping food cold in a car is really easy. Keeping food hot was a lot harder. I wouldn't say we invented the bag technology, but we kind of came up with a way to keep the food hot. So the problem that we had, especially with our pod system, where we would assemble the pods on site. That's how you were able to do these custom orders so quickly. So the pods would be in this kind of shelf system, if you would imagine, like maybe the way like we used to receive mail, a bunch of small shelves kind of all stacked up in like 5x5 columns. And the pods would be sitting in that thing in this metal shelf, and all of that was just difficult to keep hot because there was so much volume there. So the obviously, like, this is a solved problem. There are hot bags that you put in your car and you connect to a cigarette lighter, but they're really only designed to hold a couple of meals, a couple of small items. There's not a lot of mass there that needs to get heated. Well, so at first we started using multiple heating elements in these bags, and we thought that was a great idea until the fuses in people's cars would blow because they were drawing too much current. And that happened a bunch of times. So we stopped doing that, obviously, and we came up with the idea to have just really simple deep cycle DC marine batteries, 12 amp DC batteries in these cars. So then wired to those batteries, we had an electrician connect cigarette socket lighters with backed by fuses and all that. So we would then just connect 3 or 4 heating elements into these batteries. But now you had like 60-pound batteries that we were loading in and out of the driver's cars. But it worked. I mean, it worked for quite a while, for as long as we were doing hot food delivery. And then towards the end, we were talking to a thermal engineer, I think worked at Apple, and she came up with this idea. So you have cold packs, right, where you basically put cold, you put your cold energy, in a sense, into the ice, and it's stored. Well, you should be able to do the same thing with heat. And so there's this wax that you would basically put into an oven, and it would just, absorb all the energy, and then you would just plop that into your bag, and it would emit heat. And you do a couple of those, and they were super light. We never, really got to needing that because of the way our business changed, but that would have been the next step. I was kind of excited to see that. That was pretty cool. Like, we were playing with fans, like circulating air around, like all these different little tests. It was kind of fun.
So there's nothing off the shelf that you could just buy and use. I mean, it sounds like developing your own, or at least hacking together your own technology would be pretty expensive.
We looked into custom manufacturing stuff. It was just cost prohibitive. We looked at a couple different solutions. So yeah, it was kind of like hacking together a prototype and then maybe having it manufactured at some point, if the business kept going. But yeah, it's funny. I mean, there's no real need for this problem. Most food, most of these containers, you're going from, let's say, like Pizza Hut to someone's house. So they don't even need, they don't need to keep the food hot that long. You don't need to keep it up to code, right? It's different kind of business.
Interesting. I'd like to kind of move on to talking about your startup podcast experience. I think probably a lot of people, especially founders, are interested in learning about how you got connected with the startup podcast and Lisa Chow, and what your experience was like.
Yeah, so that was mostly Jason who facilitated that. I think he just sent them an email on a whim and said something like, hey, we're a small startup. We have this much money left in the bank. We have, 6 months of runway left. It's difficult. Do you want to come talk to us? And they said yes. I, admittedly, I'm not going to make no reservations about saying I was pretty skeptical about it. I'd never done anything like that. I wasn't really sure what it was going to be like, or were they going to follow us around with microphones and cameras? But it turns out no. We were just meant to record important conversations that Jason and I would have. And it was actually kind of cool. It felt like a little bit of therapy. We would be having a fairly serious conversation, and then we would start recording it. Molly did a really great job editing the podcast, and she came on site twice, actually, to meet with us and record us in person. And they were super nice and incredibly professional.
What was the effect on the business?
Well, you mean the volume?
Yeah, I mean, you have the product hunt effect and TechCrunch bump, and what is the startup podcast influence on the business?
If we were still running B2C, I think, I'm trying to remember. So I think we had definitely closed on demand at that point when it came out. I can't remember if we had also closed order ahead, the last part of the B2C business. But I can't say, I don't think it had any major long-term effect. We did get, a lot of nice feedback from it though. Yeah.
Were there any common questions or feedback from friends, family, the community about your bento experience as revealed on the podcast?
Yeah, so I kind of expected a lot of, I think as you do, I kind of expected a lot of negative feedback. And, and actually before I even started the podcast, they gave us some references to talk to some other people that had done this similar thing with them. And the woman that I spoke with said, yeah, we expected to get all this terrible feedback. How could you be, for example, like, how could you be so dumb? Of course, you're running your business like an idiot. And I kind of expected the same thing, but we got a lot of positive, supportive feedback that just basically boils down to, running any kind of business is difficult, especially one that you don't have subject matter expertise in. It's hard, and then it's 10 times harder than you could imagine that it was going to be. So that was nice. It was nice to get that kind of feedback.
I remember you mentioning the importance of subject matter experts in running the business. I think, if you go back far enough, you had started the business with Mateen from Top Chef fame. Mm-hmm. Did he have any input on the operational aspects of the business, or even from your investors?
So the investors, that's the easy answer. No. No one, we didn't have any investor that really knew the restaurant business per se. And because it was a seed round, or because it came from a seed fund, we had, hundreds of investors. Mateen's expertise was, and is, how to run a restaurant, not necessarily how to run a production kitchen. And in the beginning, on a small scale, it was a restaurant. We could do a lot of non-scalable, time-consuming dishes, I would say, that had a lot of steps in them. And as we grew, we quickly realized that it just wasn't going to work. It's so funny. Even simple things like garnishing. You have a dish. Let's say, this dish that we were doing, it was a seared tuna Niçoise salad. And so you're searing tuna. You're hard boiling. He got these really small eggs that were cute. I don't know where he got them. So you're hard boiling those, and you're quartering them. And you're adding that in. You're having grape tomatoes and putting those in. You're sprinkling a little edamame in there. You're putting some salad in there. Ponzu sauce in every container, and probably several other ingredients that I'm forgetting. But there were a lot of touches for every dish, and so figuring out how to streamline that, how to scale the business where you still have dishes that look great, taste great, they're just as healthy, but they can be done at scale, was really hard. It was hard for all of us. I don't think any of us knew exactly how to do that. And those kinds of people, I think, are, people that run airline kitchens, or people that run hotel kitchens, or banquet halls, catering, really. So yeah, Mateen did an amazing job creating delicious food. And I think that was part of our initial growth, but we all had trouble figuring out how to adjust these dishes so they would scale.
What surprised you about building the experience of building bento and of this business?
I think, it sounds silly to say it. I think the difficulty of it. So I was prepared for it to be hard. I was kind of mentally ready to go through the rigor of a difficult startup, but it was 10 or 100 times as harder as I thought it was going to be, in terms of getting the business to work. And then also, mentally, and I talked about this in the podcast too, there's this weird line between, insanity and grit. Do you just keep going? Is that grit? Or are you just being crazy? Do you give up and stop? And I think, when you read about successes, you typically, and you look back on them and at their roots, they have typically had really hard times. Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk are the most obvious examples, but There are also plenty of people that have hard times but don't make it, and you just don't hear about them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the difficulty of it was super surprising.
How much of that do you think was the additional aspect of having to basically build a restaurant and do all this offline stuff versus building a pure software business?
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, I think that was a lot of it. And and the other thing that I guess was surprising was how quickly we were able to close some of these seed rounds in the beginning, because of the growth that we had. And yeah, I mean, I guess in a sense it was surprising that how quickly we were kind of put in the position to scale a business that we didn't quite understand how to scale yet. And yeah, I definitely think, that was, it's not just software, so it doesn't scale like software. And there's a lot of expertise there in scaling this kind of thing in industrial engineering that, we just didn't have. For example, like how do you arrange a workspace? How do you arrange a kitchen like this in such a way that you're minimizing movements by all the people, that can shave off 1 minute, 2 minutes here and there, add it up over the course of a whole day, shaves off a lot of time, adds a lot of efficiency. And that was the kind of stuff that we just weren't prepared, in how to handle that kind of stuff.
One challenge for a lot of entrepreneurs is with raising money, and you mentioned that it was relatively easy for you. How did you find your investors, and how is raising money for a food delivery startup different today than it was back then?
I don't want to give the impression that it was easy either. I think we were lucky enough to have gone through Jason Calacanis' incubator, and I think he played a huge role in our ability to close those initial rounds. But again, that was also because of this growth that we had, this tremendous growth that we had in the beginning.
Define that for me, actually. What is sort of a level of tremendous growth that would attract investors to invest in something like this?
The exact numbers I'm kind of fuzzy on at this point. I think it was something like 30% week over week new users, volume growth. But that came, Jason and I would go to our kitchen. So this is when we were just doing dinner. So we would leave the office. Yeah, I guess let me back up and say, I don't want to give the impression that it was easy to get to the point that we were able to raise that money. So my days were really long. I would wake up at around, 9, and then I would coordinate in the beginning, I would talk to our iOS developer who was then in China and kind of touch base with him. And we would talk until about 10 in the morning when he would go to bed. And then I would work, obviously, all through the rest of the day, go home and have dinner around 6 or 7 when he would kind of then be getting online. And then we would sync and work together until like 1 or 2 or 3 in the morning sometimes. And I would go to bed and we would do it again. That was in the very beginning. And then running, so then there's the kitchen. So the kitchen and the office were 2 separate locations because there wasn't space in our original kitchen for Jason and I to be there. So we would leave our little office in the Mission, I think around 3:30, and we would get to the kitchen at 4 and start preparing to open the restaurant for deliveries around, by about 5. And then Jason and I would run dispatch because I hadn't coded any kind of automated dispatch at that point. So I would stay until 9 or so, and he would pick up the slack and stay until we closed, which was usually around 10. At that point, we didn't have anyone else, so then there were closing procedures. You have to wash all these shelves and wash these bags and put food away, and there's this big closing procedure. So by the time you're out of there, it's 11. And that was super difficult in the beginning, but we pushed through it, and then after we closed, I think the next big seed round, we were able to hire someone to help us with that, to actually run those kinds of operations. And like I was saying, the growth part, like how you scale this kind of business, I think one of the hardest things was trying to figure out, who do you hire? Who do you hire to figure this out? What kind of person is going to help us scale this kind of business? Is it a production chef? Someone who ran an airline food operation? Or is it an industrial engineer who's going to help us arrange the workspaces and minimize movements? And Jason, you don't know. I don't have the answer to that. And it's a huge decision because it's not like we had raised, $10 million to hire, let's just hire both of them, right? These are big decisions with people who have real lives that need to get paid a real salary. When you hire someone like that, it's a big draw on these limited resources that we have. We raised money, but it wasn't.
That's interesting. I mean, because, coming from a engineering background, you might have better clarity on how to hire an engineer, for instance, or on the business side, like how to hire sales. But if you're opening a restaurant, it's very difficult to determine, do we need a, kitchen manager? Do we need someone that will be on the line? Or do you need somebody that's going to be more of a front-end person? And then you have to worry about logistics of deliveries and things like that. So that's definitely a great insight for people who want to branch out into non-technical businesses.
Yeah.
So having been on the other side now, what is your outlook for the admittedly crowded food delivery market?
Obviously, Spoon Rocket closed, which was disappointing to read that news. It's hard to say. I think if anyone can really figure out the economics of on-demand, I think it's going to be Sprig. They have, I think, the most resources out of anyone in the space. And time is going to tell to see whether or not they're able to make profit on the unit. Supposedly, supposedly Spoon Rocket had figured that out as well, according to some of the articles that came out when they closed. But they just didn't have enough volume to support, on those, they didn't have enough units, kind of like you're only making a penny or something, right? It's just, you need a lot of volume to support any kind of corporate overhead as well. So it's a tough model. On demand, especially with anything perishable, so with food, is really tough because you have to make a product ahead of time that you don't know whether or not it's going to sell. And normally that works fine. That's basically what car industries have done for a long time. You produce something and you hope you sell it, but it doesn't spoil. And so the problem with food is you have an additional cost of not only delivery, but waste. And everyone kind of thought, oh, it's the restaurant without the overhead of a restaurant. Well, like, sort of, but, I mean, not exactly. Not at all, actually. If you have 800 customers coming to Chipotle, they've just come to you and you have zero waste. So you have no delivery and you have no food waste on those customers. If you service 800 customers with on-demand, you've paid a drivers 800 times to deliver that food, and you have some percentage of food waste that you weren't able to sell that then gets taken directly off your bottom line. So yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that for a normal restaurant, you have the overhead of like rent and service staff and that sort of thing. But, with this sort of model, you offset that with, I think, probably the delivery aspect of that. Moving food, a perishable item, all over a metro area can be very expensive.
Yeah, especially, I think on demand it can be. I think the models that work are order ahead. I don't know, for example, I don't know Muncherie's finances, but when we had started to model this out and move to the order ahead model, it worked really well. When we kind of forecasted it and modeled out the economics of that, if you hit the right density.
What advice do you have for somebody that wants to do this, or even to open up their own restaurant?
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to really, really look at the cost of the food and make sure that your food costs are under control. You want to be, your food costs want to be no more than 30% of the total cost of the dish. And that's just for a restaurant. If you're going to do any kind of, tech behind it, I think you really want to look at the business model and make sure that you are making money on every unit that you sell, or that there's a clear path to it, that it's not asymptotic, that it's not a limit. You're never going to approach that, the profitability point.
Do you have any plans for another startup in the future?
Maybe. I think, yeah, I mean, it was a really, really good experience.
What would you do differently?
I think I would try to have a pretty clear, if it were this type of bits to atoms kind of business, I would make sure that I have a clear path, mathematical path to profitability on the unit, in that business. And if the math says no, then it's not something that, I'm gonna go into. I think, yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. Even with VC dollars fueling growth, even at a loss. Yeah, I mean, that's basically, in a sense, that's what's happened to us, right? And it was still an amazing experience, but knowing what I know now, yeah, I would say I would personally want to make sure that there's that trajectory to profitability. So how did you feel when you left Bento? Yeah, I mean, I felt like, a sense of loss, really. I felt like it was a breakup, I guess, is the best analogy. Something you worked really, really hard on. You kind of make you have the realization that, the company is out of money. It can't afford to pay me. It doesn't make sense to stay at this point. And so, it was amicable, obviously, between Jason and I, and we still keep in touch. I went there the other day and met our the new head chef that's going to run our operation. But it was still sad to have worked so hard on something. You make all the cliche sacrifices, weekends and nights, avoid you miss out on certain things for the past year and a half, and it doesn't work out. And that was my choice. That's the risk that I took. But it still felt like a bummer. You got to kind of pick up the pieces and decide, okay, what did I learn from this? What does that tell me about myself? What do I want to work on next? Why, going back to the beginning, like, why did I start Bento? And kind of figuring out, okay, look at the positives, right? What did you learn? What did you gain out of that? And then focus on that and move on to the next thing. What can I do with all this knowledge that I've gained? The engineering approach, I guess.
One of the hardest things to do is shutting down or leaving your business. And you'll read a lot that startups don't fail. Their founders, they decide to quit. When did you know that was time for you to move on?
I remember thinking about it, having the thoughts for a couple of weeks. So we reached the point where we had run out of money and there was obviously no additional funding coming in. We busted our butts to get this order ahead model done, and it was running. Just, I don't know, we couldn't hit the right volume. It didn't look good enough on paper yet. And that was kind of the last, that was what we had banked on. Like, okay, we'll do this big push all through January, working extra hours and everything to get this order ahead scheduling model done. Got it done. We rolled it out in February. The results were really underwhelming at first, which makes sense. You need time to grow. A real valuable business needs a lot of time to grow and be put together properly. And it was right around, March or so where Jason and I had said, we have to make decisions on, we're either going to run out of money here and have to close the business in a very uncomfortable way, or we're going to have to make really hard choices. And so we had to make really hard choices when we laid off the kitchen staff, and then my engineering staff obviously had to make the choice to move on and find other jobs, because no one can afford to obviously live in San Francisco on zero rent for any extended amount of time. I think that was the thing that hit me really hard. I'd kind of just gotten, so I had 4 engineers and a fantastic QA team, which I'll plug, global app testing, fantastic, in the UK. And it just gotten all this stuff kind of running really well. Everyone knew how to work. We had, really, really succinct sprints. Everything was running really well. I kind of figured out how to be a good manager and keep these other human beings happy. And then that all went away. So the reason I'm saying all this is that all went away. We had to lay off my engineering team that I had spent so long building. It's so difficult to hire an SF, and close down QA. And, for me, it was kind of like, okay. And I thought, well, maybe things will turn around. Maybe something will come of funding. We can quickly hire these people back. But, that didn't really happen. And then there was nothing kind of in the funnel that indicated that this was going to turn around. And so I, talked to Jason. Order ahead was I don't think we had turned it off at that point. It was still on, but the growth was so small. And I talked to Jason and said, I think for me, it's time for me to just take a step back and try to figure out what's next. Realistically, you're also paying me, and I don't think it makes sense for me to draw this. Well, actually, no, I was taking no salary at that point. But we were looking at these numbers of what does it take, what volume would we need in catering, what kind of volume would we need to sustain our salaries. And I even said, I don't know what kind of sense it makes for me to stay if this is mostly a catering business. You can run that with spreadsheets for right now anyway. And now it's a very different kind of business than what I originally started doing. And I think it was all of those, I don't think it was any one thing, it was all of those things added up that kind of made me say, I think this is the the right decision to, that's obviously a hard choice, not a fun choice to make, but yeah.
What do you think will happen to the business?
I have incredible respect and faith in Jason. He is relentless in a way I thought I was. He is probably 10 times as much as I am. It's turning a net profit. It's small, but I mean, it's doing well. So I think he's figuring out, and we'll figure out how to keep it running. It's a really interesting question. Like, what will happen? What's the future of Bento? And, I don't know. I think right now it's very myopic. He's focused on keeping the volume up, keeping the costs under control to keep the business running. So we're not, because if it doesn't lose money every month, it can run indefinitely. Now it's a matter of building it so that, he can draw a real salary, a decent salary. I think it could be, I think the pod model is super cool. I think that you could, if you get this working in the right way, you could take it and stamp it out, into other cities, and be a major, potentially like white label supplier of food. So, I don't know if I'm allowed to say, but who we do it with, but we do a lot of high volume catering with various companies. And, you could take that model to other cities, where someone else has the customers and the demand and the system built up to determine customer preferences in a big office park or something, and we're the ones producing that food. So I could see something like that. Yeah.
So I'd like to wrap up with some fun questions that I think give listeners a introspective of who you are outside of your experience with Bento. I'm going to ask you a question, and the first thing that comes to mind would be great to get your thought on that. So first of all, I'd love to know what your first business was.
When I was a kid, I used to fix computers, and I had a little side business of fixing people's computers, and so sometimes I would go to their house, and I could fix it at their house, or what I would do a lot of the times was bring it back home, fix it, and then deliver it back to them all cleaned and fixed, yeah.
What kinds of things do you collect, if anything, and why?
I don't think I do anything like collecting, stamps or coins. I do really enjoy ham radio and electronics, so when I have an opportunity to buy fun new toys like that, I usually take up the opportunity.
You must be huge on Kickstarter.
No, I mean, a lot of that stuff I wait. I like to see how it plays out, and then maybe I'll buy it later.
What's something that nobody knows about you?
I don't know if nobody knows this, but probably very few people know that I am fairly fluent in sign language, and that goes back to RIT and the big deaf culture that was there that I was a part of.
When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Let's see. I don't think I ever had anything super specific. I think once I discovered computers, I remember my dad brought home, it was like I don't remember the model, an old IBM DOS system, and that was the first computer that I was able to play with. And then after that, we actually had a web TV, if you remember those. And I started making little websites on that. And then I had just at some point probably decided I wanted to, quote unquote, make websites as a living when I was a little kid. And this is sort of where it's all ended up.
Which startups, founders, or investors do you admire?
Jeff Bezos is a super interesting guy. And I know Amazon has he has worked hard to get Amazon to where it is. And the same thing with Elon Musk. Those are the two guys that come to mind. I know he worked incredibly hard to get SpaceX and Tesla up and running and get both of those companies through some really hard times. And the background of Elon himself is really interesting. I really admire those guys. Someone once told me I had I guess you would call it a bromance with Elon Musk, but really I would call it a bro crush. I think that's the proper term.
And finally, what's a useless fact about yourself that you'd like to share? Although, you've already said that you're fluent in sign language, but I'd say that that's actually pretty useful.
I could count to 10 in Japanese. I once base jumped off of the Stratosphere in Las Vegas. That is an actual ride that you can do. That was pretty cool.
Thank you so much for your time today, Vincent. We wish you all the best in the rest of your journey.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Joe.
This has been the inaugural episode of the VentureForth podcast with Vincent Cardillo.